Right. Well, yeah. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Breathe Better podcast. So today I actually have a special guest with me today called Jake Gordon. Jake Gordon is a breathwork facilitator from Glasgow in Scotland, which is very exciting to have another Scottish male person that I can speak to about health and wellness and all this sort of stuff. So we're going to speak to Jake today a bit about his story, all the stuff that he gets up to with breathwork, and just a bit about himself as well. So, hello, Jake.
Hi Gareth, thanks so much for having me on, mate.
No worries at all. No worries at all. So the first sort of thing I want to ask you or speak to you about essentially is like your journey into breath work. So
Mhm.
what was the catalyst that made you sort of search for something more? Had you gone to breathwork sessions or anything before? Or
No, so basically, kind of just grew up in Glasgow and lived kind of the stereotypical, male Glaswegian life of drinking and going out partying and stuff like that. And I guess like I always had this little voice in the back of my head saying like, there's more to this.
yeah.
There's more that we can do here. And maybe in like 2018, I was working as like a videographer, and it was quite like a high pace, high stress job. I was
Mm,
smoking like loads of cigarettes, drinking lots of coffee, and I went along to like a meditation class, a work time meditation class at the Buddhist Centre in Glasgow, and it was 20 minutes, and I just walked out there going like, "Woof, what the hell had happened to me?" But then like the strands of my old life just kind of like pull me back, and I never really went
mm,
back to meditation class, but it definitely planted like this seed. And fast forward a year or two later, I decided to go traveling because I just had to get out of Glasgow basically. I ended up living in Australia, and I ended up at this kind of sort of like Hare Krishna ashram place. And for those of you who aren't familiar with an ashram, it's basically a place where men and women go to practice yoga, meditation, breath work. And that's kind of where I decided, or just naturally happened, where I just started to get into meditation, breath work very deeply, very quickly. And then within like 6 months, a lot of like health problems that I'd had growing up had kind of dissipated. I'd
mm,
got sober for the first time. I got like it was the first time in my entire life that I'd never had like coffee, cigarettes, weed, sex. It was just like a clean slate. And then I just discovered this almost like new level to life. And
mm.
then since then, yeah, I've not looked back, and breathwork amongst other practices, but breathwork's been the kind of integral root of that. And I think it resonated so much with me because I had a lot of breathing issues growing up as well. I was always like had a permanent cold, and yeah, I guess that's the kind of the version of the story. But yeah.
Yeah, that's really, really fascinating. It's so much it's so interesting how it's such a culture shock, isn't it? Like total difference. Like no more smoking, no more drinking, none of this, no more weed, any of that, and it's just like not even any coffee. You know what I mean? Just away in an ashram somewhere. And I think there's something so powerful about that, like change.
Mm.
And I think that's just so amazing. So what sort of things were you sort of dealing with as a kid? Did you have like or sorry, what's the best way to sort of word this? I guess. Um, in what way did the breath work and all of the other combination of like different things do for you physically? So like with your breathing and stuff, how much has your breathing improved since incorporating all of this stuff?
Radically altered my breathing completely. So when I was born, I had really large tonsils. I had to get those tonsils removed.
Mm,
I had a lot of like teeth issues, so I had to get braces from an early age. And that kept when I had braces from a very early age, my mouth was just constantly propelled open. And so for those of us that don't know about mouth breathing, it's kind of like one of the worst things you could do for your health. And basically, because my mouth was propelled open from the ages of like 14 to like 21, I could never breathe through my nose. And if you've ever, if everybody's had a cold, you know how miserable it is, like when you can't breathe through your
God, yeah.
nose. So it's just like, it was just like that times, constantly, and that affected my sleep. That affected like how I showed up in school, and since becoming, I've had like a steady practice for like 2.5 years now, and I've never had any breathing issues since.
Mm,
And I used to sleep with my mouth open a lot, and if you ever sleep with your mouth open, you're never going to be able to access like the deep, like healing states of sleep. You're
mm,
always going
mm.
to have this kind of superficial level sleep where you might feel a little bit like rested, but subsequently you're always going to feel tired.
Yeah.
Um, so that's probably the biggest physical changes.
Mm.
Just being able to breathe through my nose permanently, and
Yeah.
it sounds really simple, but like when it's blocked up, and it can have such a bad effect.
Oh, totally, I can imagine. And it's one of those things, everyone who's had a cold, and everyone's had a cold, haven't they? But it's like
Mm-hmm.
every time you have it is the one thing you take for granted is just being able to breathe properly through your fucking nose. It's
Yeah,
like the
yeah.
simplest thing, but that's so profound. I think that's really, it is sometimes it is just the simplest things. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and as you say, even just waking up without having a massively dry throat and a dry mouth, I imagine is probably one of the nicest
Yeah.
things in the morning.
I used to
So,
have to like it was such a struggle to get out of bed. Like I remember being
mm,
like like such a struggle to get out of bed from the ages of like 16 to like 21. I would
yeah,
always skip school. And my theory is because I've been sleeping with my mouth open and then not knowing what's happening and just thinking this is what happens to me. Do you know what I mean? Because I've
yeah,
not had that piece of education. And it was when I got that piece of education, it started to like all the puzzles started to fit in, you know?
mm.
So yeah.
No, I can imagine. Yeah, and sometimes it is like this is something that I'm always amazed at as well. Is like we're taught so much in school, right? We're taught so much growing up, but why are we never taught how to fucking breathe? Like,
Mm,
in biology and stuff, you do all this stuff. You go in quite deep. You learn about like the makeup of a plant and all this sort of stuff, and your human biology to an extent, but you never actually learn like the mechanics of breathing properly. And imagine if you were, or not just yourself, but imagine if everyone was taught that in school about how to breathe properly and how to like use it to your advantage and how to stay connected with that center. Like imagine the difference in our society today if we all knew how to fucking breathe properly and like knew the
mm,
power of your breath. You know what I mean?
mm.
Just it's the mind boggles, doesn't it? So
The school system has a lot to answer for in that regards, not just like for breathwork. I think
yeah,
there's
yeah.
a long list of skills that could be planted in seeds throughout the school system that would not like grow as we go older, instead of having to do this kind of like unfucking, as you know what I
Yeah,
call it. It's
the
like we have to
unfucking.
like unfuck ourselves and then to go, oh, okay, I'm not actually so messed up. Do you know what I
I
mean? Like,
know, yeah, for sure. There's just
mm,
so much. The school system has an awful lot to answer for, especially nowadays. So there's one thing I wanted to talk to you about, which was your breathwork classes. So for those of you who don't know, Jake, as I mentioned earlier, runs breathwork classes in Glasgow. He facilitates them, and the one that I really loved, I haven't ever had the pleasure of actually getting to any of yours because I don't live in Glasgow. One day I will. However, I have had the pleasure of doing some of your insight timer meditations and breathwork, which have been amazing.
thank
But
you.
one I want to talk to you about is the one with, I forget her name, but the ones that are linked in with music. I think that's really
Alex.
interesting. Alex, yeah, is it the
Yeah.
violin? Sorry.
Yeah, so there's two Alexes, so shout
Two.
out to two Alexes. There's the Gong Priestess, who is an
Mm,
incredible woman who uses these like big 32-inch gongs, and
yep.
we kind of created a session that we ran for like a year actually called
Mm,
Rest and Connect, where we combined the mediums of breath and sound together
mm,
to create this kind of restorative, rejuvenating experience. And then there's Violin Alex as well, who is an incredible musician, like one of the most amazing like violin players, beautiful vocalist, and we just wanted to create a space, use breathwork as a tool to deepen presence in order to feel music on another level. The violin is such a unique instrument, and like the opportunity to see the violin in such a small, intimate space mixed with the breathwork, I think is a very interesting sort of offering.
No, I totally agree. I think it's such a interesting combination, and it's something I'd really like to be able to explore myself, and it's something I've just not got around to. I'd love the idea of breath and sound together, because I
Mm.
believe breath work can take you into or your breath can take you into such a nice state where you're kind of just receptive to like different vibrations, if you know what I mean. Like it takes you into a nice, calm and centered place where you're probably able to actually hear the music and you're not just caught up in your thoughts. And there's something so emotive about a violin for some reason, and tied in with someone sort of singing vocals and stuff. It just must be a really, really profound experience. It really must be, and I think well done for putting the two together. Really, I think it's
Music was
fantastic.
my first love, man. Like I've been
Mm,
such music's been such a big part of my life from early teenagehood, and it's definitely shaped so much of like who I am. And I think that was like one of the first experiences of altered consciousness and altered states is like hearing a song that you love for the first time and getting that like overwhelming feeling of whoa, what is this
yeah.
song? So like
Mm,
music when I do, classes by myself, like I try and like incorporate music and time playlists and kind of create a journey with the music too. So
mm.
music's definitely a big part of everything that I do as well.
That's amazing. Yeah, I really like that. It's really nice to have that sort of tied in together. Um, excuse me. I think it's really, really interesting actually. The tie of music and like sound therapy and all that sort of stuff, especially tied in with breath work, must be really, really powerful.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, there was a question that I wanted to ask you as a male in the wellness sort of world. Now, obviously, this doesn't affect everyone because we're not all males in the wellness world, but
Mm.
there's it maybe is more appropriate for myself being in a sort of yoga standpoint, but I still ask you it anyway. But basically, it's just, do you feel like there's any stereotypes that you feel like you needed to conform to just as essentially as a male breathwork facilitator or a male in the wellness world or in your ashram or in
Mm.
any experience where you've gone to say a yoga class or a meditation class? Have you ever felt like there was a stereotype you needed to conform to, if that makes sense?
For sure. Yeah, I think it's a great question. Um, so I don't think I would ever say that I'd ever felt that I had to conform to this, but it's definitely
Mm,
something like a theme that I've noticed maybe amongst, males in the kind of quote unquote wellness space. But
yeah.
this sense of like almost like aggression of like
Mm,
this sense of like it has to be hard, it has to be challenging, it has to be difficult.
mm, mm.
You have to like push through this in order to become the thing on the other side. Do you know
Yeah,
what I mean?
absolutely.
And I think there's a time and a place for that message, but when it's constant, it gets
Mm,
a bit like, oh mate, just calm
yeah,
down, bro.
calm it down.
Do you know what I mean? Like, I
Yeah.
love a little bit of like, motivational speech, but
Mm,
it gets watered down if it's done frequently, or if
absolutely. I totally agree.
that's such like a part of the brand or the facilitator. So I've never thought that I would have to conform to that, but it's something I've
For
gone
sure.
like I've noticed it,
Mm,
and been like,
mm,
wow. Like I've always just kind of done me, so
mm,
I've just
mm,
keep doing that. But that's definitely one theme that I've sort of observed over like the male
mm.
wellness space. But again, it's hard as well because like this is my observations from like social media. Like I haven't
Yeah,
actually
of
had
course.
like the ability or the time to like engage with a lot of like male wellness facilitators. I did
Mm-hmm.
a little bit when I was traveling, but we're kind of hard to come by
Yeah,
in
absolutely.
Scotland. There's not a wide range of us, but yeah, these are my observations through social media. So
Mm-hmm.
and conversations and clips, and so it's a little bit skewed, but maybe yeah, that's definitely something I've seen.
No, no, absolutely. That's brilliant, and I appreciate your honesty as well because it's not, I'm not asking. I'm going to ask everyone similar sort of questions who comes onto these podcasts, but I just think it's interesting to get a male perspective because, as you say, there's not many of us. There's not many people. Like, how many people come to my yoga class and they say like, I've only seen like two other male instructors. Like, I was the only guy on my teacher training, for example, and like most yoga classes I go into, there's no men. So I think it's interesting to get other people's perspectives of like how they show up, for example. That's probably a much better way to word the question. But I tend to agree with what I've seen on, once again, Instagram, because I've not had the pleasure of talking to a lot of them, except now yourself. And this is actually mine and Jake's first conversation as well,
Yeah.
on, which is quite interesting. But yeah, I get the same sort of thing. So go hard or go home. You know what I mean? Everything has to be challenging. Everything has to be 100%. Everything you have to sweat. You know what I mean? You have to push through. Everything has to be challenging. And I think there's such an element of this like toxic masculinity within that. It's like guys aren't allowed to be soft. We're not
Mhm.
allowed to be relaxed, for God's sake. Like our shoulders have to be up to our ears the entire time and everything has to be tight and tense. Like that's not how it should be. We need to be able to connect with something deeper. And I think for myself anyway, this is what's helped me on that path is like actually being the accepting that in most places, most yoga classes or most wellness things that I go to, I'm probably going to be one of the only males there, and that's okay. So it puts you in that space where it's like it's able to. I notice within myself anyway that I can soften my edges if I'm just around women in a sort of wellness space. It's probably very different for them, the fact that I'm there. But if there's another guy though there, I'm a very anxious person and I have a lot of sort of weird conditioning from just childhood and all this sort of stuff. But if there's another guy there, like I tense up a little bit because I'm like, oh God, what's he going to think of me being in this space? But he's in that space too, you know? And it's just interesting. And it's just something I'm interested in is getting other people's perspectives on the same thing, I guess. And yeah, just seeing if there's any stereotypes that people feel like they need to fit into. So for myself, it was very much like, I need to be the really ripped guy on Instagram who can do press handstands to be able to get people into my class. Like that's utter bollocks.
Mhm.
But because of Instagram and because of social media and not actually creating any lines of communication with people, and that being the main thing that you see when you sort of look at Google and Instagram and stuff, it makes you feel like you have to fit into that. And or for myself, and not everyone, but I've always had trouble sort of fitting in and fitting into spaces and belonging. So you kind of see where everyone goes and see where the crowds go, and you think maybe that's what I should
Mhm.
be doing. So yeah, just like the school system, I've had to do a lot of unfucking of my perceptions and ideas in the process. Um, and yeah, it's just an interesting perspective. So yeah, thanks very much for your honesty on that as well. But not actually
No,
being able
you
to do
too. I really relate to that point of like not, yeah, finding places to fit in and stuff like that. And also to that point of like if another guy comes in, like the energy definitely shifts because
that. Yeah.
80% of the people that come are female, and I really would love more men to come. Like, I really would love more men to come. And I've done like a few kind of men only things before, and it's always been received really well.
Oh, good.
So I
Amazing.
do hope that I do think and I do know that this like it's spreading, like
Yeah, for sure.
people becoming more interested in themselves and like what's going on inside and stuff like that. So I do
Mm.
I do think in the future, it won't be such it might be a little bit more of a balanced space.
Yeah, for
Um
sure.
which will be cool.
It would be, yeah. And I think it is, as you say, it does feel like it's starting to open up. Um, like I see males yoga classes or male only sessions now, which are busy, like really, really busy. Um, and I think that's great. I really do think that's great as a doorway into all of this stuff. And I think it's great that men can find a space where they can sort of, in realistic terms, that's probably a very vulnerable space for them to be. Is that like a breathwork session or yoga session or something like that, where they're sort of looking after themselves, quote unquote, like delving into a bit of their sort of emotional side, because it's so um I don't even know how to put it. It's just so like it's not something that I was ever taught to really do when I was growing up. You know what I mean?
Mm,
It's like unmanly or whatever. It's just don't be a girl, don't be that, and a lot of sort of homophobic terms, especially when I was growing up. Like
for
you would
sure.
essentially be gay if you had feelings and all this stuff, which is utter nonsense,
Mhm.
utter nonsense. So yeah, I think it's just a really interesting space. I think there needs to be a little bit more of a open communication with people, especially in um, sort of male side of things with each other. I think that's really important. And I think some of
Mm,
these male only classes are a great place to start, really, really great place to start, or men's work retreats or anything of that sort. Just getting a bit
mhm.
more comfortable with each other and talking to each other. So there's one thing that I wanted to ask you about as well was your sort of ADHD diagnosis. So was that a late ADHD diagnosis that you received? And just if you'd like to tell me a little bit about that, because I think that'd be really interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
If you don't mind, of course.
Yeah, of course. So yeah, it was pretty late, I guess. So it was maybe about like 4 years ago now, 5 years ago. So I was
Mm,
maybe like I'm 26 now, so it'd be like 22. Basically, I just, going back to that voice in the head, I've always had this feeling of being different. I'd always had this feeling of, not fully fitting in. There was always something in the back of my head that was like, different, I guess.
mm,
And then one day I was just watching this documentary and I almost felt like I was getting spoken to through the television. And it was like Rory Bremer, who is this kind of English comedian guy. He's like a C-list celebrity. He's not very like famous, I don't think. But anyway, he was going through this documentary, and the documentary was the process of him getting evaluated for ADHD, and I was just
right.
like, oh my god, that's me. Oh my god, that's me. That's me. That's me. That's me. That's
Mm,
me. And then from then I just went on this like huge big rabbit hole, and I just started to recognize and see like a lot of patterns, a lot of behaviors, a lot of things that happened to me in my life. I think a week later, I went to the GP, got referred, and then to the psychologist. I just like fucking broke down. Basically, I just
mm,
was like, I just had this total like verbal, just like just
yeah.
spill my whole life in front of her in like 10 minutes, and just started like had this huge release.
Mm,
Um, and then we kind of went through the process, and she was like, yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say that you've, because it was like you basically get this checklist and it's like 1 out of 5 for every scenario. I mean,
yeah.
it's not like it can't be like a foolproof way of like diagnosing a neurological condition,
No,
but
for sure.
you know what I mean? Like, so it was just like five, 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 all the
Mm,
way. I got prescribed some medication, and this is kind of before breathwork. Still,
yeah, yeah.
this is me, working like a really high stress, high impactful job. Smoking a lot of cigarettes, smoking
Mm,
a lot of weed as well. Like
mm-hmm,
weed was I was like a daily weed smoker per, I would say maybe like 45 years.
mm,
So that was all going on at that time too. And basically she gave me some medication and the medication just didn't work out. So
yeah.
then I just kind of went through this process of like self-education. There's a lot
Mm,
of great content out there, a lot of great, content creators are making stuff about, diversity, ADHD, autism, all that kind of stuff. And I just resonated a lot with it all. And then since then, I've just tried to. I hate to use the word symptoms, but it's kind of like the only way I can like phrase it. But I've just
yeah.
tried to become more aware of those symptoms, and I guess the way that breathwork fits into that is that breathwork, one of the biggest benefits it's gave me is taught me how to be like less reactive. I can get quite hyperactive when I'm talking about something or that I'm passionate about. And like growing up in high school, you probably have experienced this, but I like to call it like the wind up culture. So like, when you're like, you're 14, 15 and everybody kind of winds up each other and it gets quite deep and quite dark quite quickly. And
It
I
does,
think
doesn't it?
that had a huge effect on me. And I was quite like, like who are you talking to? Who are you talking to? Do you know what I mean? Constantly in this like fight or flight, like thinking someone was going to try to start a fight with me. So one of the biggest benefits of breathwork is it just calms me down. It just
For
keeps
sure.
me centered. And I've had like the daily practice has kind of been like the bedrock of which I lie back on. And then as long as I've got that, to lie back on, then things are a bit more, manageable.
For sure.
And a bit more tolerable. Yeah, so that's kind of like how it's worked for me. Yeah.
No, that's amazing, and it's so nice that the breath work is such a bedrock for you, because I know a lot of people or a few people anyway, from my own experience, who've breath work does a lot for people. With some people with ADHD, some people it doesn't work whatsoever. But I think it's great that there's something that can center you. You know what I mean? Like there's something
Mm,
that can center you in this space, because you can feel kind of lost with an ADHD diagnosis, I think, because there's medication, but the medication doesn't work. What you're left with, like a
mm,
diagnosis and sort of, as you say, sort of symptoms or traits that you're left to sort of pick up the
mm,
pieces around. And it can get pretty frustrating. Like I'm only just going through the process of getting evaluated for ADHD. Like I know damn sure that I have ADHD. It's just never picked up. So I'm going through the evaluation at the moment, and I know what you mean about like the sheet, and it's like 1 to 5 or whatever, and it's like
yeah.
everything. You're like, yep, 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 yep. And I remember handing it to the doctor, and he was just like, looked at one sheet, and he was like, yeah. So I'll refer you to the psychiatrist. I'm fucking right. And then I was lucky in the sense that he gave me antidepressants to sort of cope in the meantime, and they've actually worked quite a lot at stabilizing my mood. Apart from that, I've not done much else. The traits are still the same. I still lose stuff all the fucking time. I still get quite hyperactive and focused on stuff, and I still have these sort of traits. And it's a part of just accepting who I am at this point as well, which is probably quite a difficult thing for a lot of people to do. But
Mm,
and I think what is most profound about it for me, and maybe for yourself as well, is that for yourself, 22 years without knowing that you had this neurodivergence or difference. You know what I mean? And I'm 28. It wasn't until I was 27 that I kind of discovered that something's not right, something's different here.
mm,
And as you say, it was like you read things or you hear things and you think that's me, like that's me. Like I
mm,
resonate really deeply with that, and it's makes you question a lot of things. Um, so yeah, no, I think that's really wonderful that the breath work does such a profound effect for yourself, and it's a similar thing for me. I find that pranayama and breathwork for me is if I there's a lot of days I don't do it because I'm really bad at keeping routines. But on the days that I do it, like I am adaptable. You know what I mean? I'm
mm,
less reactive. I'm more centered. I'm calmer. I'm able to take on challenges of the day, and the little things that normally would frustrate me, that are my own doing, I don't tend to get that bothered by.
mhm,
And I think that's something that, and I say it all the time to people, and I think within a yoga world, it's quite hard to, or within a yoga teaching point, it's hard to get people to sit down in a pranayama class and do it. Um,
mm,
because everyone's so obsessed with movement and asana and stuff. But if you're just doing it in a breathwork lens, it seems to be much more popular. And I think that's fantastic because it's getting people to do the work. But
mhm.
the biggest thing that I tell people is consistency. And no one likes to hear it,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
it's
yeah,
fucking consistency.
yeah,
You know what I
yeah,
mean? Every day, sitting down, if
yeah,
it's 5 minutes, if it's 10 minutes, if it's 30 minutes,
yeah,
every fucking day, it doesn't matter.
yeah.
And yeah, consistency. So I'm not going to keep you for too much longer, but I would like to ask you one more question about breathwork and then two more questions
Cool.
just after that as well. So one question about breathwork is, obviously it's called the Breathe Better podcast for the reason that I'm trying to get people to talk about their feelings a bit more, talk about things that are
Mm,
going on, take a little bit of weight off the shoulders, breathe a little bit better. Because as
mhm,
you'll know, if you release some of these pent up emotions or things that you're holding on to, you will in fact breathe a little bit easier. And of course, I'm going to be sharing some breathing tips along the way as well. So I would like to get, and it's probably going to be talking consistency, isn't it? But I would like to get your number one tip on, um, let's just say on breathwork. What's the most fundamental thing about breathwork that you could give as a tip? Is it like 2 minutes a day of this, or is it even just becoming aware of your breath? Sorry, excuse me. Just what's your I, I'm not very good at asking the questions, apparently. What's your sort of most fundamental thing about breathwork? Sorry, let's go with that.
Most fundamental thing. Oh, I want to say consistency, but I'll say something else. So this is something I've learned recently, but systematics. So what I mean by systematics is that breathwork is a system of ascending difficulty, of ascending practices. One thing that I'm seeing a lot of people getting into with breathwork is jumping straight into the practices that are really opening, really can be challenging, can be quite intense, and also from like a physical and biomechanical point of view, you're not like encouraging the way that you want to breathe functionally. So people who might already have like underlying anxiety or stress or all these other things are not really getting a fair understanding of what breathwork actually is, if that makes sense, because
Yeah.
they're getting like shown into one kind of like, I would say, or a bracket of like advanced techniques, because it helps to release emotions. It can produce tears, and that's kind of what people want. Do you know what I mean? But the what I've come to really understand is like the real power in breathwork is learning like the system of breathwork. And if we want to talk about its origins, pranayama, where it comes from, that's how it was taught in India. It was taught as this ascending order of difficulty. And like a lot of people say, if you can damage yourself quite a lot if you're doing. Oh, did we cut out?
You say something now?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, there we go. Sorry, it was my end. Apologies.
Should I start from it? Should I start from right? I'll just go from So systematics, learning that breathwork has this. I like to say breathwork's got something for everybody. So a
Yeah.
lot of people say like breathwork doesn't work for them, but what I would suggest or what I would invite is like the understanding that there's maybe more to it than and what you maybe first experienced. So I would say fundamental would be the awareness that breathwork as a systematic discipline of ascending difficulty.
Like step by step, almost, isn't it? It's like don't chuck someone
Exactly,
in the deep end.
step by step.
Yeah, don't expect someone to chuck them in at the deep end and expect them to swim. Like that's not how it works.
Yeah.
I think that's really important and really, really important for breath work as well, because you can have some quite, let's just say, profound and intense experiences with breath work.
Yep.
And if
I've
you're
had a
not
lot of
familiar
people
with
come
it,
to me, traumatized actually from, certain breathwork situations and felt that, breathwork wasn't for them, and which is quite sad in some ways.
it is
But yeah.
absolutely. I think it's a really important message to share. So thank you very much for that. So we've not got much time left at all, just a couple of minutes. So just a quick answer from yourself. So I'm going to ask everyone who comes on the podcast this, but what is something about yourself that you find really difficult to accept? That's probably quite a
so much, man,
question
as well.
to ask, isn't it, for a quick answer? For myself, it's the fact that I'm really spiteful, if that helps you at all. Like, I know deep down I'm really fucking spiteful. If someone pisses me off, I can bite back, but I have to work with it, and I have to accept the fact that's part of me. The more I resist it, the more I'm going to bite back. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I'm really challenging on myself. I'm quite like I smack the proverbial whip against myself quite a lot. So that's something that I'm always conscious of, that I'm trying to work on. Like I hold myself up to like a really fucking high standard, and if I don't meet that standard, which I never really do because it's kind of impossible to meet, I always kind of beat myself up.
Standard always gets harder, doesn't it?
Exactly.
Cool. And last question, what is something about yourself that you, oh, sorry, that's the same question. What are you most proud of that you've achieved so far?
I guess like just I'm quite like tenacious. Like I'll just keep going until I get it. Like I'm quite proud. I guess I couldn't say like one specific thing, but I guess I'm proud that I like keep going in the face of adversity and not just like chuck it in or give up or whatever. Yeah.
No, that's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. I think that's definitely something to be fucking proud of, is not just giving up and digging deep and just getting on with it. I think that's really fucking hard nowadays as well. So well done.
Thanks, man.
If there's
Cheers.
anything, I'm proud of you for it as well, because it got you to where you are today. And I think that's really good. So there's one thing that I'm going to be doing with everyone who comes on as a guest is that I am giving you the option of I'll either plant a tree with under your name, for example, Jake Gordon, or Everyday Breath, or whatever you want it to be, or
Mm.
I'll restore 1 meter squared. This is a very random thing, but restore 1 meter squared of wildlife, wildflowers, and wetlands. So you can choose either a tree or the wildflowers that I can put something in your
Um,
name.
let's go tree. Let's go
Go with a
tree.
tree. So the tree will be in
Let's
the
go
UK, and
tree.
I'll send you all the details for that. So you can have a wee
Yeah,
look at it once it's
nice
grown
one.
up.
I'll go visit it.
Perfect. So I'll do all that through ecology for those who are interested. And
Cool.
underneath the description, in the description, I'll put all of Jake's details in if you're interested in his breathwork sessions in Glasgow, and I'll put a link to his Insight Timer as well. And he really does have some wonderful, wonderful practices on there and some courses as well of like breathwork fundamentals, all that sort of stuff. So if you're on Insight Timer, you should definitely check him out. Even if you
Thank you,
struggle to sleep,
Gareth.
especially, he is on there. So thanks very much again, Jake, for coming on.
Thank you, mate. Really enjoyed this. Thanks a lot for having me, man.
No worries at all. It's been an absolute pleasure.